The August morning dawned clear and bright over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Millbrook, Ohio. Margaret Brennan stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across her carefully tended garden. At 82, she still maintained the same routine she'd followed for decades: up at 6:30, coffee by 7 o'clock, and a moment of quiet reflection before the day began in earnest. She was a woman of precise habits, formed over 40 years of teaching high school English. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes coordinated with the care of someone who understood that appearance mattered. Even on this Tuesday morning, preparing for nothing more than routine blood work, Margaret had chosen her outfit. Thoughtfully, a bright pink blouse beneath her favorite charcoal cardigan, the one Daniel had given her for Christmas, and her good pearl earrings. At 82, Margaret Brennan was remarkably independent. She drove herself to appointments, maintained her own home, and managed her finances with the meticulous attention to detail that had made her legendary among her former students. Her mind remained sharp, her wit quick, and her capacity for kindness seemingly endless. The only concession to age was the occasional stiffness in her joints and the reading glasses she now wore constantly, suspended on a delicate chain around her neck. The house on Maple Street had been her sanctuary for over 30 years. She and her late husband Robert had raised their 2 children here, weathered the storms of middle age, and planned their retirement dreams within these walls. After Robert's death 15 years earlier, Margaret had briefly considered selling, but the thought of leaving felt like abandoning a lifetime of memories. Instead, she'd adapted, learning to be alone without being lonely, filling her days with volunteer work, gardening, and the occasional visit from her children. Her Tuesday morning routine included breakfast with her son Daniel, a tradition they'd maintained since his father's death. Daniel, now 54, was a successful insurance broker who'd inherited his father's business sense and his mother's careful attention to detail. He lived across town with his wife Rebecca, a nurse at the county hospital, and their relationship with Margaret was one of genuine affection rather than mere duty. On this particular Tuesday, however, Margaret was running slightly behind schedule. She'd spent longer than usual on the phone with her friend Eleanor Patterson, discussing the upcoming church fundraiser. Eleanor, her neighbor and closest confidant, had been worried about Margaret lately, since the death of their mutual friend, Helen Chen. 3 months earlier, Margaret had seemed more fragile, more prone to moments of sadness that she tried to hide behind her usual bright demeanor. "Are you sure you're all right, dear?" Eleanor had asked during their conversation. "You've seemed a bit scattered lately." Margaret had laughed it off, but Eleanor's concern wasn't entirely unfounded. Margaret had been feeling unsettled recently, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. There had been small things, bills that seemed higher than expected, account balances that didn't quite match her careful records, a general sense that something was slightly off in her carefully ordered world. She'd been seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Williams, to help process her grief over Helen's death. Dr. Williams had assured her that confusion and minor memory lapses were normal parts of the grieving process, that the mind sometimes played tricks during periods of emotional stress. Margaret had accepted this explanation, but the businesswoman in her, the woman who'd managed a household budget for 50 years, couldn't shake the feeling that something more concrete was wrong. At 9:45, Margaret gathered her purse, checked her calendar one final time, and called to her small black terrier. Molly, the dog, had been a gift from Daniel and Rebecca 2 years earlier, a companion to help fill the quiet hours. Molly was an intelligent, affectionate animal who seemed to understand Margaret's moods and routines with uncanny accuracy. "Come on, girl," Margaret said, clipping the leash to Molly's collar. "You can come with me today. The appointment shouldn't take long, and you love car rides." The decision to bring Molly was unusual. Margaret typically left the dog at home for medical appointments, but something about the morning felt different. Perhaps it was the beautiful weather, or maybe some subconscious instinct told her not to be alone. Whatever the reason, she would later be grateful for the impulse, though not for reasons she could have imagined. As Margaret loaded Molly into her 2018 Toyota Camry, Eleanor Patterson appeared at her front door, still in her gardening clothes. The two women had been neighbors for over 20 years, had weathered divorces, deaths, and the general challenges of aging together. Eleanor was 5 years younger than Margaret, more prone to worry, and had appointed herself as Margaret's unofficial guardian since Robert's death. "Off to Dr. Morrison's," Eleanor called, walking over to Margaret's driveway. "Just routine blood work," Margaret replied, checking her watch. "I'm running a bit late, actually. There's construction on Maple Street, so I'll have to take the long way round." Eleanor frowned. "Are you sure you should be driving in construction traffic? Those crews can be so unpredictable." "Eleanor, I've been driving for 60 years, Margaret said gently. "I think I can handle a little construction." But her tone was affectionate rather than annoyed. She understood that Eleanor's concern came from love, not condescension. "Well, if you're going to be later than expected, I'll keep an eye on the house," Eleanor offered. "And if you need me to check on Molly, ... Actually, I'm bringing her along," Margaret said, gesturing to the dog already settled in the passenger seat. "She loves car rides, and I might stop at the pharmacy afterward. No point in making 2 trips." Eleanor nodded, but something in her expression suggested she found the decision odd. Margaret usually left Molly at home for errands, claiming the dog was too excitable in stores. But she didn't comment further, simply waved as Margaret backed out of the driveway. The time was 10:02 a.m. when Margaret Brennan drove away from her home for the last time. Chapter 2, The First Signs of Trouble. Morrison's office was located in a medical complex on the other side of town, normally a 15-minute drive through familiar neighborhoods. Margaret had been seeing Dr. Morrison for over a decade, ever since her previous physician had retired. The appointment was routine: quarterly blood work to monitor her cholesterol and blood pressure, both of which remained remarkably good for a woman her age. Margaret's route usually took her down Maple Street, then left onto Elm and straight to the medical complex, but the construction Eleanor had mentioned was more extensive than she'd expected. Orange cones and barriers forced traffic into a single lane, and the backup stretched for several blocks. After sitting in barely moving traffic for 10 minutes, Margaret made a decision that would prove fateful. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed Dr. Morrison's office. The receptionist, a young woman named Julie, whom Margaret had known for years, answered on the second ring. "Dr. Morrison's office. This is Julie." "Julie, dear, this is Margaret Brennan. I have a 10:30 appointment, but I'm going to be running late. There's construction on Maple Street, and traffic is just terrible." "Oh, don't worry about it, Mrs. Brennan," Julie replied warmly. "Dr. Morrison is running a bit behind this morning anyway. How late do you think you'll be?" Margaret looked at the line of cars ahead of her, none of them moving, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. "I'm going to have to take the long way around. That's perfectly fine. I'll make a note in your file. See you when you get here." Margaret ended the call and immediately turned onto a side street. heading toward Highway 47. It was a longer route, but it would bypass the construction entirely. She'd driven this way many times over the years, particularly during her volunteer work at the animal shelter, which was located near the state forest. The detour took her through less developed areas of the county, past farms and wooded lots, where new construction was gradually creeping in. It was a pleasant drive on a beautiful morning, and Margaret found herself relaxing despite the delay. Molly sat contentedly in the passenger seat, occasionally putting her paws on the window to look out at the passing scenery. At 10:43, Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Ashley Kavoch, her caregiver. Margaret had been reluctant to hire help, but a minor fall in January had scared her enough to accept that some assistance might be wise. Ashley had been recommended by another client, seemed competent and trustworthy, and had gradually become a regular part of Margaret's routine. Margaret answered the call using her car's hands-free system. "Hello, Ashley. Mrs. Brennan, I hope. I'm not disturbing you." Ashley's voice came through the speakers, professional and concerned. "I was just calling to confirm our appointment for tomorrow. I want to make sure I have the right time." "Tomorrow is Wednesday," Margaret said, slightly confused. "But we cancelled tomorrow's appointment. Remember, you said you had a family emergency." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry I'm juggling so many clients today. I hope you don't mind me calling." "Of course not, dear. Are you all right? You sound a bit stressed."